Good morning, everyone. We can do better than that, juniors. Good morning, everyone. Just so, a couple of things before I bring Mr. C up to introduce our guests. Put away your phones, stay present. All right? Put away your phones and stay present. So this is a special honor. It's an annual event that we schedule. Most of you, some of you will be going to the museum, the 9/11 Museum, because it's a very important part of our history and for you to remember, all right? None of you were born during that time, right? So we want you to remember what actually occurred, right? Understand the experience that others went through, right? That the people are still dealing with today, right? We live in a region that was also impacted. You know, I don't think any adult who was alive during that time can tell you exactly where they were on 9/11. All right, so sit back, put away your phones, be present, right? I bring up Mr. C.
Good morning, everyone. So today we are going to have a brief discussion on September 11th, 2001, which is a day of great significance in your history curriculum and throughout this country. So each year, in collaboration with our local Rotary Club, we are honored to host community members who have experienced the events of 9/11 firsthand and will speak to us about their personal stories. Additionally, after today, on Monday, September 23rd, as an 11th grade class, you will be traveling to the 9/11 Mobile Museum at Lake Isle Country Club. We will be talking more about that in the coming days and getting us into groups and organized for that, but it's extremely crucial for our school community to understand our local history and to honor the sacrifices, tragedies, and heroism of this day in our history. So I want to thank you all for being here today, and thank you for being a great audience as we start this event. At this time, I'd like to bring up Mr. Alan Benedict for some opening remarks.
Thank you, and thank you for being here and for your attention this morning. Once again this year, the Eastchester Rotary Club is sponsoring the 9/11 Never Forget Mobile Museum, which will come into town on Sunday afternoon, be greeted by the fire department in our local community, the Tuckahoe and Eastchester Police, and then be escorted to Lake Isle Country Club. On Monday, when you come, you will be given tours by the driver of the museum, which has been traveling the country since 2008. He and two members of the fire department of the city of New York will be giving you tours. It is a brand new museum. As I said, they started in 2008. The main purpose of the museum is education for folks like you. And Eastchester High School will also be participating on Tuesday. So on Monday morning, we will be here to greet you with the Tuckahoe Trolley, which incidentally is driven by a fire commissioner in our community, Anthony Laurie, who is also a veteran of service. Our three speakers this morning will be starting with all of whom had experience and continue to have experiences with the 9/11 terrorist attack. First speaker will be Carrie Benedict Foley, who is a 1991 graduate of Tuckahoe High School. Tell you about her personal experiences. She will be followed by the Reverend Andrea Rayner, who served as a chaplain down at what became known as the Pit and the recovery operation. She was there for many months. That'll be followed by the retired Lieutenant Paul Ranalone, the Eastchester Fire Department, who continues to serve as a fire commissioner in our community. Thank you for being here, and Carrie will step forward.
Good morning. As my father said, I'm a Tuckahoe High School graduate, 1991, so I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad that Tuckahoe is teaching the young students about 9/11. None of you were alive, as your principal said, so it's really important for you to understand what happened on that day. And I want to make sure that you feel comfortable to ask questions. This is not just a presentation. If you have any questions, we're all here to answer those so that you can get a true feeling about what happened that day. So, as mentioned, I'm Carrie, and my husband was Danny Foley. He was a member of FDNY, and his brother, Tommy Foley, also a member of FDNY. On 9/11, Tommy was working at Rescue 3 in the Bronx. Danny was not working, he was home. We heard what was going on. I was out of the house at that moment, came home, spoke to my husband, and he said, I'm gonna go down, Tommy's working. And he left, all the bridges were closing, you had to find different routes to get there. He went directly to Rescue 3, and they all went down. By the time Danny got to the site, the towers had already collapsed. Tommy was on the rig. His whole group, 7 of them, all died in the first tower collapse. So we were lucky enough to find some part of him about 10 days later. On that day, Danny stayed down there. We were way back, pre-cell phone time. We had Nextels, little walkie-talkie cell phone type things, and communication really kind of lapsed. So nobody knew where anybody was. Nobody knew what was going on. Everybody was trying to call each other. All the cell towers were busy. You would get busy signals. So we didn't hear from Danny for hours and hours, but I knew he had left late enough that he was probably not in the towers. By the time we heard from him, they couldn't even find Rescue 3, the truck itself. There was so much, massive, massive piles that had just fallen, and it's smoldering and smoking. And he finally called and said, I'm staying here until I find Tommy. Well, he stayed. His cousin is a fireman in West Palm Beach. His brother-in-law was a fireman in Mount Vernon. His father was on the sanitation. They all went down. They kept working for days and days, just trying to find any sight of anyone. And they found one of the members of Rescue 3 mostly intact. Something had fallen over him that sort of saved his body a little bit. He was still killed, but they were able to get his body, which then gave them an idea where everybody was. So they worked in that area and spent days and really sifting through dust, rubble, bone parts, very, very sad, emotional trauma. And for Tommy, we actually found part of his knee that he had surgery on. There was a screw and bones, and we got back of Tommy maybe a small little amount. Everything was pulverized, everybody. So if anyone was able to get their family member back, it was a true blessing. And to this day, they are still doing DNA testing and identifying people, which is a blessing, even though you would rather have your person with you alive. It was a blessing in disguise. So Danny stayed down there working, found Tommy. After his funeral, he continued to work and help identify other people, clean up the site. The whole process was months and months and years. He finally went back to work to Rescue 3, where Tommy was, and worked for many years, and 18 years later was diagnosed with 9/11 pancreatic cancer. And then he died in February of 2020. So the effects of what happened on one day, in one moment, changed our lives forever. I have 5 children who don't have a father. Because of this moment. So that's why we feel like it's really important for you to understand that it's not over. I'm on the FDNY email distribution list. Every week, every other week, another funeral, another 9/11 related cancer death. People are dying. The number of FDNY deaths from cancer or illness has surpassed the 343 that died that day. We are at 371 last week. It could be more today. Same with the police, all the first responders. The illnesses are killing more people than actually died that day. So one of the things that was really important to my mother-in-law was education about 9/11. And that's why after Danny died, we created the 9/11 Education Foundation. We started bringing the museum to places and wanted to educate the kids who knew nothing about it. A little project that I started this year was we created a shirt. Most of the time when a fireman dies, they get a shirt. So all firemen say, "I never want to be on a shirt." So we made a shirt for Danny, and this year, close to the anniversary of his death, I said, if anybody needs a shirt, just let me know, I'll ship them to you. And I want you to send me pictures where you are around the world, because I want my kids to see that his memory is alive. And Danny and Tommy really knew people everywhere we went, very social people, very loved by family and friends. And I wanted like this shirt to kind of still bring people together. So we couldn't get the little slideshow up on the big screen, but I have over 170 pictures, and they're still coming, of people sending me pictures of them in their shirts all over the world. So it's creating another unity that Danny and Tommy are bringing people together. I have a friend who works in Scarsdale, and she said this guy pulled up and said, "Why do you have that shirt on?" And then they talk about how they knew Danny. And it's happened in Aruba, it's happened all over the country, right here in our backyard, and all over the world. So it's a little project of mine that I'm just trying for the kids so that they can see his memory all over the country. My kids, like I said, don't have their father, but they are amazing. They have persevered through this, they move forward through fear, and they understand, even though they weren't alive on 9/11, they understand about it, and they're involved in helping us educate kids also. They are 21, 20, 18, 12, and going to be 11 in a week or so. So that's my story. Does anyone have any questions? A lot of times you hear things from different sides and what you're reading in your history books and things, and I'll be here if you want to ask me questions after privately, or any questions about anything. We all feel that way, because what you read and what's written is not always true for everyone. This is affecting everyone still, and it's going to for a very long time. Good. Andrea?
Wow, that's really hard to follow. Well, thanks, Carrie. As Mr. Benedict said, I was a chaplain on 9/11. Actually, I'm a United Methodist pastor, and for 20 years I was a hospice chaplain. During that time of 2001, I was actually a chaplain at Janssen Hospice right here in Tuckahoe. The office used to be right on Main Street in that kind of Masonic building. And so on 9/11, we were at our team meeting where, hospice is taking care of terminally ill patients, mostly in their homes, but sometimes in nursing homes. So we had gathered on that Tuesday morning to kind of triage with the nurses and social worker about who might need to be seen and maybe who had died overnight, when our secretary ran in and told us that a plane had just hit the World Trade Center, one of the towers. So we all visualized like a small tour plane. We thought that's really sad. Maybe the pilot or another person died. 15 minutes later, she comes in again and says another plane just hit the tower. The social worker said, "Oh my God, we're at war." And I remember going, that's kind of dramatic. You couldn't get your head around it. You couldn't get your head around what was happening. And again, we didn't have the smartphones. We didn't have a TV in our office. So it was very old school. She brought in a radio, and we started listening on the radio to the reports of what was happening, while also we were triaging what patient needs to be seen, who can get by today without a visit from a nurse. So we tried to triage to who needed to be seen immediately and who could wait, because we assumed we'd have tons of people, maybe hundreds of people flooding into Lawrence Hospital who were injured. Being one of the first hospitals in Westchester, we just thought there's a chance that people would be coming through. So I called my husband. He happened to be home that morning, and I said, "Turn on the television and tell me what's happening." And I called my mother in Ohio because I knew she would worry, thinking maybe I had a doctor's appointment in the city, and I wasn't sure the phones would be working. So she said, I'm just so glad to hear from you. I figured you were at work in Westchester, but I just was so nervous about it. So my husband turned on the television, and so I didn't have like a cell phone with me, so I'd have to run back and forth to my office to have him telling me what's happening. My kids were in kindergarten and third grade at the time. So we just sat then. We just sat and waited as a team for the people coming to the hospital who never came. Because as you know, there were really no survivors on 9/11. And the people who were coming out of the buildings who might have been injured were seen right there in New York City. So at about 3 o'clock, I said, I got to get home. I have to see my kids. It was such an uncertain time. We literally didn't know if there was going to be more attacks or what was happening. I live in Rye now. When I got to Rye, it was like a war scene. Like women were going, moms were going person to person. Have you heard from your husband? Have you heard from, your brother? And we lost 16 people in Rye that day. So there were fathers who never came home, mother who never came home. After that day, it was kind of hard to go back to work with my terminally ill patients, but of course that's what I was called to do. But my heart was downtown. And so I happened to know the wife of an Episcopal bishop who was the bishop to the armed forces, and I connected with him, and eventually I took a shift for him at Ground Zero, working from 11 at night till 7 in the morning. That was the first time I was there. It was about 2.5 weeks after the attacks. So my job at that point was just to walk the site, to hear the stories, to give support. I rarely wear a clergy collar, but I wore one at Ground Zero just to identify me as a different conversation than, say, one of the volunteers or even a social worker, because what it invited was people to remember that they were not forgotten by God. Because there was a real feeling of where was God on 9/11? Why did this happen? How did this terrible thing happen? So that first night, I just walked the site. I heard story after story after story of people finding bits and pieces of people, of a lot of survivor guilt. If you were there, I was speaking to one EMT, a lieutenant, who just began to cry, and he said that he and his partner were carrying a woman like in a chair down flights and flights and flights of steps. And he said she was probably dying at the time. She was just about dead. But they were carrying her down when the building started to shake. And he said we had to make a choice to keep carrying her and probably all three of us die, or to leave her and run. And he just sobbed. And he said, I have 4 kids. He's got kids. We left the lady there and we just ran. And just the pain of that and the guilt of that, needing to feel some forgiveness for leaving her. And he said, I think she was dead anyway, but we made a choice. And I said, none of us know what we would have done in that same situation. None of us know what we would have done. Those are the stories that I started to hear as I walked around. And again, wearing a collar kind of invited a different conversation. There was a female emergency service person as well who I talked to, and she told me about being there on 9/11 before the buildings came down. And the same thing, they were right on site. The buildings started coming. She got separated from her partner, and she said, I didn't know whether to run back and find my partner or to keep walking. Again, she had 4 or 5 kids, and she said her partner said the same thing. He didn't know whether to look for her or to run. She said, if we had gone back for each other, we both would have died. So the choices people made, not only on that day, but then the choices they have to live with going forward, are so haunting for so many people. And I think that was part of my role, is to offer an ear, kind of an open heart, so people could tell me their stories, and also to give them some support and forgiveness, that whatever they did on that day, to survive was okay. So eventually I was assigned, in November, the clergy were starting to get organized because there were some really nutty people going there too. People were getting through security, telling folks that, oh, you know, if you aren't saved, you're going to hell. Half these people are going to hell. It was a little bit crazy. So security started getting tighter, and the clergy were starting to be more organized. And we had priests, ministers, rabbis, imams, Buddhist priests. And so we were given a choice of where we would like to serve. Was it at the family center? Was it at Fresh Kills? Was it at one of the places where the workers would go and rest? And I volunteered for the morgue on site because I thought as a hospice chaplain I might have more acquaintance with death than some of my colleagues, because I'd been working hospice for about 10 years at that point. Unfortunately, nothing can really prepare you for seeing bits and pieces of people. You know, hospice, while heartbreaking, you kind of prepared as somebody is dying, and you keep them comfortable, and you work with the family, and you help them understand that this is happening, and it's usually related to an illness. But on 9/11, things just happened. So at the morgue, it was like a little trailer. It got moved a couple times as the work started going, as the burning pile eventually became the pit. And those fires burned underground for 100 days. So you wonder why more people weren't found, is because those fires burned for 100 days. So at the morgue, which was a little trailer, we were there. There's always a clergy presence. We did 8-hour shifts. I might follow a priest who followed an imam who followed another pastor. I often did the night shifts because I could, even though I would work, 11 to 7, go home, get my kids to school, sleep for 2 hours, go to work at hospice. It was an exhausting time period. But at the morgue, when a body or a piece of a body was found, it was brought in, like initially from the pile or the pit, brought in. If it was a person of service that they could tell, maybe a part of a uniform, there was a flag draped over the body bag. And when they brought it in, we never knew whether there was going to be a piece of someone, most of a body of someone. I never saw a whole body during the year of recovery, really, that I worked there. The most I ever saw was a torso of someone, a hand, a foot. And so when the body bag was opened, you just had to kind of take a deep breath and hope that you could handle it. When the bag was opened, the crime scene photographer would take a picture because it was a crime scene. It would be logged in a big book, the time it was found, the approximate place it was found, the body part, if we could tell what kind of body part it was. And then after all that was done, then the chaplain would offer a blessing on the remains. And that was one of the most touching things that we saw, where, grown men and women, fire department, sometimes a construction worker would all take off their hats, and the clergy would offer a blessing on the remain. So you might think, like, why? Why offer that blessing? What did it matter that every part of every person received a blessing, whether it was a piece of tissue or a tooth or an arm? Why did it matter that we were offering blessings? And I think in part it mattered because all of us who were standing there thought, what if that were me? Wouldn't I want to be honored, blessed, seen as a person? And I always thought, for my own faith, I don't know who this person was, but God knows who this person was. And so now we're doing everything we can on this side of the expanse to offer a blessing and to honor them. And then the body, or part of the body, was then taken to get DNA testing at the permanent morgue. So that was the work that I did. It was 24 hours a day, clergy presence. In the long hours of the night, when nobody was being found, I would again walk this site, listen to the stories that people had to tell. One in particular was a young Port Authority officer who said that he was present when They thought part of one of the hijackers was found. I guess they could tell by the where it was, or part of the plane that was there. And I was curious, and I said, I just imagined FDNY standing around this body, and I said, was it desecrated in any way? Did people spit on that body in any way? What was the reaction? And he said, no, we treated that body with the same respect that we treated every other body, because this was still someone's son. This was still someone's father. And I thought, what a powerful thing that is when you don't lose your own humanity in the face of absolute cruelty and madness. They would not let this hijacker steal their own humanity. To treat your enemy with some respect, I suppose, keeps your own humanity there. They wouldn't let that violence take their own humanity from them. So the effect on me generally was, I had 5 years after 9/11, I had cancer, went through kind of a rough time. My kids were in 5th grade and 8th grade at the time. And then I've just come through another year of cancer treatment. And my husband at one point said to me recently, when I was diagnosed last year, he said, I wish you had never gone down there. And I said, I hate to tell you this, but if it happened again, I would do it over again, because something of the best in humanity was called to face the worst of humanity. And I think that's why it's important to hear these stories and to remember that we don't have control over everything that happens, but we can always control how we respond to any given situation. What is our response to things that happen in our world? So I guess I'll leave you with this, and there are just so many images, but I don't want to blabber on and on. I don't know if you guys, this is even beyond me, but Mr. Rogers, who was iconic way back in the day, said when he would get nervous and get scared about things that were happening in the world, his mother used to tell him, when you get afraid, always look for the helpers. Always look for the helpers. And that has helped me a lot as I think of what you all are facing all the time, whether it's school shootings or a planet on fire. We always look for the helpers. And to choose to be one of the helpers, again, gives us courage. It helps us be part of a greater community that is sort of keeping our planet together. So, do any of you have any questions about the morgue or what happened there? I have to say too that quickly is that that even the guys driving the big rigs, like the diggers and things, excavators that were trying to clear the rubble. One of the first nights I was there, kind of a fireman pulled me aside and he goes, "See that guy on with the excavator? You see how he's digging, but then he's giving the bucket of the excavator just a little shake." I said, "Yeah," and he said, "Do you know why they do that? It's just in case any part of any person falls through." People were so careful. There were firemen raking through the dirt with their bare hands to find any scrap, any bone, any part of someone that could be identified so a family could get some peace and some closure. So I hope when you go to the museum and you kind of see all the horror of it, that what you retain is really the best of who we are and the responders who showed up, like the Foley brothers. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Ranalone. I am a retired Eastchester firefighter. And I was down at the site for one night. And I just want to relate to you the experiences that I had on that particular day. The equipment that I'm wearing, that I'm going to put on, is worn by every firefighter who responded to the scene. This whole ensemble is called turnout gear. It's meant to protect you in the fire. outfit, along with my helmet, weighs 30 pounds. This air pack is another 30 pounds. It gives you 30 minutes of air, which is, if you're standing around doing nothing, you get 30 minutes. If you're working, you're lucky to get 15 or 20. So this is the way every firefighter went into the Twin Towers, wearing all this equipment, as well as any tools they might be carrying. I would have a hand light over my shoulder. I would have a thermal imaging camera on one of these hooks over here, and I would have some tools, a set of irons, which is an axe and a Halligan tool, a big pry bar, a hook, which is it's a device to pull down ceilings. It's really a long stick. It could be a 6-foot wooden or metal hook stick with a hook on the end, and you pull ceilings down with it. Fire extinguishers, all that stuff. I'll say basic stuff. This is what the guys went into. And now I read this. I can take my helmet off right now. So carrying 60 pounds of equipment. From Wednesday, September 12, 2001 through Sunday, September 16th, the Eastchester Fire Department sent an engine and a ladder company to cover Bronx firehouses or to stand by at Yonkers Raceway for deployment. I was at Station 1 and remember feeling worried about these mutual aid companies, not knowing what might happen to them. On 9/11 itself, I was off duty. I was at our family business, and I really knew nothing about what was going on until I got home later in the afternoon. On Thursday, September 13th, Mount Vernon Fire Department Local 107, in conjunction with the Westchester Professional Firefighters Coalition, was able to contact officials in New York City in order to organize a relief effort. After getting approval to do so, they contacted all professional firefighter unions in Westchester. In a matter of a few hours, 120 firefighters from all over Westchester met at Mount Vernon Station 3. Included in that number were 10 firefighters from Eastchester. 2 EFD members were able to get 3 buses at no cost. Shortly before 7 p.m., the 3 buses left Mount Vernon with a state police escort to Manhattan. Almost from the time we turned onto the West Side Highway, people lined both sides of the street with signs and flags, many thanking us and cheering. Signs read, "God bless you, and you're our heroes." The buses parked off Hudson Street on Beach Street. Upon arrival, all firefighters were organized into 10-man companies with either a lieutenant in charge or a lieutenant or captain in charge. I took command of the Eastchester contingent. We walked from the buses to the staging area, 1 block, what was to become known as Ground Zero. But to the firefighters was the pile. Along the way, people on the sidewalks clapped and thanked us, offered us water, food, gloves, masks, anything else we might need to do our work. Walking along, we could see and smell the smoke from what was once the World Trade Center. At the staging area, we saw an engine and ladder truck on a side street. The front part of the cab, where the driver and officer would sit, was the only part that was recognizable. Everything else had been crushed to about 5 feet high. On the officer's door, someone had written in memory of the lieutenant and firefighters who had apparently all been killed. After getting permission to proceed, we passed a parking lot filled with burnt-out cars. We stood in front of 3 World Financial Center, now used as a rest and rehab station. Construction workers cut up the fallen North Bridge in preparation to move it out of the way in order to gain access to the main area of debris behind it with heavy equipment. We walked between 3 and 4 World Financial Center, along the Winter Garden atrium and into 2 World Financial Center to the front entrance on West Street. From this point, we got an unobstructed view of the massive destruction. From this entrance to 2 World Trade Center, a distance of about 500 feet, were steel box beams lying parallel about 3 feet apart on top of 10 to 15 feet of concrete and other pulverized debris. There were several hundred rescuers in about a dozen bucket brigades removing debris from around the 7-story stump of the tower and passing it down to the front of the financial center, where it was dumped and the empty buckets returned to the front of the line. Ironworkers cut up steel beams, which would be passed down the line and thrown onto the pile. We filled in on several of these lines, balancing ourselves on the box beams. In some areas, you could look through the rubble and see the remains of a fire truck or ambulance. Several of our firefighters attempted to tunnel beneath the box beams in order to look for victims below us. Every so often, someone would yell to be quiet. The generators and power tools would be shut down, and everyone would stop working and just listen for any sounds from the debris pile. After a minute or so, work would continue. Looking up and around the middle of Ground Zero gave a clear view of the destruction. Every window facing the Twin Towers had been blown out, and chunks of buildings had been gouged out from falling debris. The sides of the remaining buildings were covered in a thin coat of powder that could be seen floating in the air through the glow of floodlights. It was several inches thick for many blocks around. Despite the hard work, early Friday morning, it got noticeably cooler, and about 2 a.m., it started to rain. A drizzle at first, suddenly it started getting heavy, making footing treacherous. And since we were working in T-shirts, the rain just made us wetter and more uncomfortable. An FDNY chief officer called off operations, and our chief officers decided it was time to go back. So we picked up our gear and headed back to the buses. On the buses, we were tired, cold, and wet. There was little, if any, talking on the return trip to Mount Vernon. I began to wonder what we had accomplished by going down there. We moved perhaps a couple of tons of debris, a literal drop in the bucket of the estimated 1.2 million tons of rubble. We had saved no lives. Only one body had been recovered. Yet for 8 hours, we had been willing participants of a piece of history, something people will talk about long after we are gone. We were the first group of firefighters that went down to the Ground Zero, but we weren't the last. 2 shifts of Westchester firefighters, Eastchester included, per day responded to the World Trade Center site over the course of the next several days. The only reason this effort was discontinued was the FDNY went to a 24-hour schedule with half their personnel working at any one time, meaning they had enough manpower to send to the site and man their firehouses. Whatever needed to be done and whatever we were asked to do, we would not have hesitated on this new day of infamy, September 11th, 2001. Starting on September 11th and continuing days, weeks, and months afterward, ordinary people, organizations, and businesses donated money, food, water, and clothing to victims and rescuers. A couple of weeks later, Local 916 had a Fill the Boot fundraiser at the intersection of Mill Road and White Plains Road and collected over $30,000 for the FDNY Widows and Children's Fund. That's in a matter of like 2 hours. $30,000. 1 week after 9/11, an estimated 6,000 people filled the property outside the town hall for a memorial service with political representation from Eastchester, Tuckahoe, and Bronxville. The clergy of almost every faith that has membership in the town offered words of blessing and comfort to all. The 3 police departments, the fire department, EVAC, and all were well represented. Weeks later, the fire department and police department played a charity basketball game. Local 916 sponsored the collation at the funeral for Fire Marshal and Tuckahoe resident Ronald Buca at Concordia College, which is now Iona. Members attended numerous funerals. Thanks to retired FDNY Captain Bill Spinelli, and as a direct result of our sales of the FDNY 343 hats, George Glover Jr. and I were invited to attend the FDNY Memorial Service held in Madison Square Garden in October of 2002. Although it was a cold and rainy day, about 30,000 firefighters from across the country and around the world marched in a parade prior to the service. It is amazing what can be accomplished when people put aside their differences, get together, and work for the common good. just have. Nearly 3,000 innocent people were killed on 9/11, including 343 New York City firefighters and 26 police officers. Since then, the firefighter deaths have doubled, more than doubled. The police officer deaths have gone up tenfold, and an additional 6,000 lives have been lost to 9/11 related diseases, including 69 cancers. For the last 4 years, I have been getting annual physicals at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan. They administer the World Trade Center Health Program. In July of 2022, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. After 45 sessions of radiation treatments performed between November 30th and February 1st, and 8 checkups, I am cancer-free. At the September 11th, 2023 memorial ceremony at Kensico Dam, an additional 74 names of Westchester residents were added to the memorial. Included were 2 Eastchester firefighters, Captain Philip Pinto Jr. and firefighter Vincent Spadaro. So 9/11 is the disaster that just keeps on giving and giving. And until everyone who went down that day has passed, people will still be suffering from that day. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have now. Nope? Okay. Thank you.
Stephen Siller was getting off work that morning at his firehouse in Brooklyn. He was driving away in his truck when he heard what had happened, that the World Trade Center has been attacked. He drove back to his firehouse and he geared up, such as you see Paul. He drove to the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, which was closed, and he ran almost 2 miles in 60 pounds of gear to the World Trade Center and up in to help save lives. The Stephen Siller Foundation will hold a run and walk through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. That'll be a week from this Sunday, and that's to raise funds for families still being affected by 9/11. The museum itself is sponsored by the Tunnel to Towers Foundation, which you will learn more about when you arrive. So I want to thank you for being very patient this morning. Rotarians will be there to greet you on Monday, and we look forward to answering any questions. Again, thank you so much.
The presenters will be here in the front. Before you leave the auditorium, if you want to come up and talk, have a question, have a private conversation, that's totally, the presenters are totally open to that. I also want to just thank our presenters today. We've had a strong partnership, especially over the last 3 years, where this is the 3rd year in a row now that we've hosted this assembly. So on behalf of Dr. Goodman, Mr. Arthur, Mr. Bellis, and myself, we truly want to thank you all for being here and for your partnership and bringing this to our junior class. So thank you again. If we could give a round of applause to our presenters.